Heretic was written and directed by the team of Scott Beck and Bryan. If those two names sound familiar, you might recall a little movie called The Quiet Place. This is the same team that co-wrote that masterclass. And this is also the same team that wrote and directed a movie called 65. I think it came out last year. Man, that was a hunk of garbage. 65 was just a big heaping pile of prehistoric nonsense. But here we are with a new A24 psychological thriller starring Hugh Grant of all people. Okay, I'm a little intrigued. And our heroes are two young Mormon missionaries who become ensnared in a deadly game of cat and mouse. They knock on the door of the diabolical Mr. Reed, hoping to basically teach him the gospel. Now trapped in his home, they must turn to their faith and belief system if they want to make it out alive. It seems like a pretty simple premise for a horror thriller like this one. And I'll just tell you this much. I was just roasting the hell out of 65, which this team wrote and directed. Thank God they have this movie to their credit now. I thought this movie was stellar. And it's not necessarily a horror movie that is centered around the jump scare. It's not a horror movie that's centered around the gory aspect of it. You do get some bloody sequences in here, but it's pretty minimal, which kind of means when you do get the bloody stuff, it actually means something, and it kind of is jarring in a sense. Because when you're overexposed to blood in any form of entertainment, it can kind of feel watered down. Like if you see too much of it, like you're used to seeing it. But in this story and in this context, seeing blood and just seeing bodily harm come to our heroes and our villain in this case, like that holds weight. And I think this script has a lot of super interesting and quirky analogies when it comes to religion, when it comes to fast food restaurants, when it comes to board games. I'm not going to spoil anything precisely as to how all three of those topics relate to each other, but I actually do think that it was super clever to weave in those pieces of the story to kind of center in on Hugh Grant's character's belief, who, while I'm at it, man, is his presence magnetic. Like, as soon as he opens the door for the first time and greets our two heroes with a warm smile, oh, it's Hugh Grant, the Love Actually guy. But no, this is a pure wolf in sheep's clothing style appearance. Like, it's classic. A guy who seems relatively harmless. His wife is apparently baking blueberry pie in the other room for our heroes. Yeah, no. Not at all. This guy is so calculating in what he's doing. This guy is so freaking diabolical. But yet the things that are coming out of his mouth, our heroes still somewhat trust him in a sense, which makes him all the more terrifying. And I honestly can sit here and say, this is one of my top tier favorite Hugh Grant performances. And Hugh Grant's been in a lot of shit, guys. He's really stepping outside of his comfort zone and his niche, if you will. And I think he does wonderfully with this. Like, I'm serious. Hugh Grant actually might be Oscar worthy. Now, I know this is a horror movie and he's not going to get nominated, but man, wishful thinking is just, oh, like I want him to get nominated for this so badly. We also have Sophie Thatcher appearing in this movie. You might remember her from The Boogeyman, which came out last year. She also made an appearance in the Book of Boba Fett, and she's been in a fair amount of stage productions as well. And I think she is a super bright young actress who I think has a super, super promising future ahead of her. And her character has so many layers. And there's a lot of things about her in this movie that honestly, like her faith, terrifyingly, they would kind of denounce her for doing some of the things that she did. And she has a very tragic backstory in her own right that I won't get into. And Khloe East as well. I remember Khloe East from The Fabelmans, which was one of my favorite movies from a couple of years ago, and I thought she was really strong there. And she is spectacular in this movie. I think the bond that her and Sophie Thatcher share together is palpable. I think the fact that they are sisters brought together on this mission, if you will, like that's a lifelong bond. And you really want these two girls to make it out of this situation okay. That's another thing that this movie I think does really well. It truly recognizes who the heroes and who the villains are in this situation. And it does so many things throughout this runtime that make you want to root for these girls. All the while, you're still so enraptured by Hugh Grant and the dialogue that he has, the monologues that he gets into about faith, and linking it to real life popular things that all of us come to contact with. He compares religion to fast food. He compares it to a board game, one of my favorite board games. And as wacky and as out there as it may be, A lot of this dialogue makes sense, and I think Beck and Woods should be incredibly proud of Heretic. This is a great bounce back movie from the terrible one that was 65. Like, that's more like it. That's what I wanted to see out of these guys. And I can't wait to watch this movie again and show it to people. It's beautifully shot. The editing is so great. The soundtrack is loud when it needs to be to really accentuate the urgency of the situation. The soundtrack is also very quiet when it needs to be. The only real complaints and nitpicks that I have about this movie are twofold, and we see this in scary movies all the time and big psychological thrillers like this. Number one, how come our heroes don't question certain things that are going on sooner? And I'll tell you why. It's because if they do question it sooner and if they do run the other way, then you wouldn't have a movie. And unfortunately, Heretic actually does fall into the trap of over-explaining the big plot twist at the end. And as strong as I thought this script was overall, the movie did have an over-reliancy on over-explaining certain things. As philosophical as Hugh Grant might sound when he's talking about this stuff, especially when you get to the third act, explaining the twist felt a bit too tedious. But other than that, man, I think Heretic is another really strong horror movie to come out of 2024. I think the writers/directing team should be very proud of this. Hugh Grant should be especially proud of stepping out of his comfort zone and into a whole different genre. And I think if you're still kind of feeling the spooky vibes just after Halloween, this is a really good one to check out. I'm going to give Heretic an A-. One of my favorite Hugh Grant performances and two heroic actresses at the forefront who have a very bright future. This is another A24 project and knock it out of the park. Let me know what you thought of Heretic down in the comments section below. Let me know what your favorite psychological thriller is of all time. What is your favorite A24 project that you've ever seen? Because I don't know, man, with how consistently great their movies have been lately, A24 really is turning into one of my favorite studios out there. But hey, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, tap on that thumbs up as well if you haven't already. Big, stacked month of November coming of content for you guys, and big releases hitting theaters over Thanksgiving weekend. I can't wait to share my thoughts on all those with you guys and much, much more. Thank you again for your support. And with all that being said, Back Talk, commence.